Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're having a good day as you watch this video. We're going to be talking this week about World War II. And World War II, as we've discussed in class previously, is a war that takes place all over the world, but in two particular areas, specifically Europe and Asia. And those wars, although they happen simultaneously and are sort of connected, are actually separate. It's important that you understand that these are going on at the same time, but for clarity and simplicity, I've split them up. So this video will be about World War II in Europe, and then we will do a different video, maybe the end of this week or the beginning of next week, that looks at World War II in Asia. Again, they're happening at the same time, but in order to sort of focus in on the key events in each part of the war, I've split them up for your clarity. But please make sure you know that they happen simultaneously. We had talked in class last week when we were discussing World War I about the process through which Hitler becomes the leader of Germany. And as we said, he's elected in 1933. We go through a series of slow steps where he's taking efforts to rebuild Germany's military, ignoring the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Between 1936 and 1938, he begins the pattern of expansion. First, Austria is absorbed into Germany. The Austrian people were German. There was no violence in this at all. Germany just sort of marched in and took it. The bigger issue was in 1938 when German parts of Czechoslovakia that had been part of Germany prior to World War I, Hitler invaded those areas. And this set off a major crisis because clearly Hitler was in violation of the Treaty of Versailles by doing this, and Britain and France were, potentially going to go to war to stop him from taking these parts of Czechoslovakia. The area was called the Sudetenland. They have a meeting in the city of Munich, which is in Germany, and in 1938, the British, the French, the Germans, and the Italians sign a Munich Pact where Hitler essentially says, if you let me keep the parts of Czechoslovakia I've already invaded, I promise I won't invade anything else. Many people look back on this today and see a missed opportunity, a chance that if you stood up to Hitler in 1938, maybe things would have been different. But the lesson that Hitler learns from the Munich Pact is, if I act violently, take over other countries, those other countries, no one's going to stand up to me. No one's going to stop me, because he was allowed to keep the land that he'd invaded in Czechoslovakia. So this Munich Pact is pretty much looked on as a moment of failure on the part of the Allied powers, the British and the French, to stand up to Hitler and do something about it. Notice the United States is not involved at all in this point, because we're not going to get involved in this war until 1941, when we'll be attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. So our involvement in this early stage of World War II in Europe is very, very minor. World War II in Europe officially begins in 1939. We've also talked in class about how Poland was created after World War I as a country. Poland had the unfortunate geographic position of being stuck between Germany and the Soviet Union, two much more powerful countries. And Hitler, as a fascist, which is sort of an extreme conservative, someone with an extreme conservative political point of view, he was the opposite of a communist, which is obviously what the Soviet Union was. And Hitler, in 1939, really surprises everyone by signing a non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union. These two dictatorships make an agreement that they will not attack each other, which gives them the opportunity to mutually work together to attack Poland. Britain and France, at this point, realized that they needed to draw a line in the sand, and they told Hitler that if he attacked Poland, Britain and France would go to war with Germany. On September 1st of 1939, Hitler did invade Poland. That began World War II in Europe. Hitler's invasion of Poland was really something that was new in warfare. It was referred to as the Blitzkrieg Blitz meaning lightning in German, Krieg meaning warfare in German. So this was lightning warfare. Like lightning, Hitler's army hit Poland fast, almost in a flash. And that was why it was so successful in invading such a large country in such a short period of time. Hitler used armored vehicles and tanks. He used airplanes dropping paratroopers to attack only certain key locations within Poland, so he could invade up to 150 miles in one day, and really conquered the country very, very quickly. This was a new style of fighting, used a lot of new technology, and early on in the war served the Germans very well. If you look at this map, you can see here Poland to the east of Germany, controlled by Nazi Germans. Once war is declared by the British and the French, Hitler turns his attention to the west. And you can see that very quickly, shockingly quickly, in the spring of 1940, Hitler conquers the Netherlands and Belgium, also all of France. And France is essentially knocked out of World War II by June 25th of 1940. And all of what is now France is under the control of the Germans, either directly or through, they had created a sort of fake French government run by an ally of Hitler called Vichy France in the southern part of the country. So 1940, again, the United States is not in the war. The only country fighting against the Germans at this point are the British and a few smaller countries. And the Germans are having an incredible amount of success. They've conquered all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and now Hitler is going to turn around and start looking again towards the east. It's probably not shocking to you that Hitler is not one to keep his word. And remember, a few slides ago we talked about how in 1939 he'd signed a non-aggression treaty with the Soviet Union. In 1941 he breaks that very same treaty and launches a surprise attack on the Soviet Union called Operation Barbarossa. The picture there is of Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin is one of the few people in world history who has killed more human beings than Adolf Hitler. Stalin kills as many as 20 million people while he's the leader of the Soviet Union. All of his political opponents, sends many of them off to Siberia to die in prison labor camps. They have show trials on TV to kill people who are accused, who he thinks are plotting against him. Frequently they weren't actually doing that. Whole ethnic minority groups within Russia are killed. So Stalin is a really awful, awful person, does very, very cruel things in running the Soviet Union. Initially, the Germans catch Stalin and the communists in the Soviet Union by surprise. This was in part because Stalin had just executed all of his generals because he thought that they were plotting against him. So it was sort of perfect timing on Hitler's part. So early on in the war, 1941, huge thousands of miles of the Soviet Union are captured by the German army. And it's not until 1942, when it looks like the Soviet Union is about to collapse, that Stalin rallies the country. And in a city called Stalingrad, which is named after him, they stop the German expansion and they begin to start to push the Germans back towards the center of Europe. If you look at this map, this is obviously a map of Europe and North Africa. Everything that's shaded inside of the Nazi flag on this map was part of the German Empire. Some of this were countries that were allied with Nazi Germany, like the Italians. Others were just territory that they had conquered. And if you look at how far into into the Soviet Union the Germans had advanced, you can see we're talking, double the width of France. France is a country the size of Texas, so this is thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. And it's not until they get to Stalingrad, which is represented on the map by number 21, which is really, really far into the Soviet Union, do the Soviets finally begin to push them back. In many ways, this has to do with the Soviet Union having really extreme weather, and when the Germans get that far into the Soviet Union, and it's freezing and they have no access to their own supplies. It causes massive starvation, destroys a lot of their tanks and other weaponry, and gives the Soviet Union a chance to regroup and get an upper hand. The United States enters the war in 1942 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and we, working alongside the British, begin to invade North Africa and eventually attack Italy and move our way up the quote-unquote boot of Italy, and attacking the Germans that way. At the same time, the Germans are being attacked in the east by the Soviet Union and pushed back towards Germany. And then, in June of 1944, you have what is for the United States the most important battle in Europe during World War II, and that's D-Day. D-Day was the day that American and British forces landed on the beaches of Normandy in northern France, and began the liberation of France from the Nazis. This was a very, very important moment in American history. About 3,000 or so American soldiers die at Normandy, but there have been many, many movies, many, many books written about this moment because it's a really tragic event when you have American Marines and sailors, landing and running up the beaches when the Germans have built fortifications at the top of the beach, and lots of people died in order for the United States to get a beachhead from which they would liberate the rest of France. So if you look at this map of Europe in 1944, you can see that right around here is Normandy Beach. Once the Americans and the British land there in France in June of 1944, they fairly quickly liberate the rest of France and they begin attacking Germany from the west. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union has liberated most of the countries in Eastern Europe and is attacking Germany from the east, and the United States and the British are also attacking Germany from the south. So at this point, Germany is surrounded on all sides, and it will only be a matter of time before the Nazis lose power and Germany is eventually liberated. And that will take place in April and May of 1945. It's actually the Soviets who get to Berlin first. Berlin is in the eastern part of Germany, if you know anything about its geography. Hitler was scared to death of what Stalin and the Soviet soldiers would do to him if he was captured. So on May 1st of 1945, he and his closest advisors commit suicide in an underground bunker. And it takes a few days for that news to get out to the other German soldiers fighting within the country, but on May 9th of 1945, we celebrate VE Day, otherwise known as Victory in Europe Day, and that's the day that World War II ends in Europe. That is not the day that World War II ends overall, because as we'll see later, World War II will continue throughout 1945 in Asia, and in a later video we will talk about the war against the Japanese, and that Asian aspect of World War II. So if you've had any questions or things you wanted to know more about, please be writing those down, and when you come to class on Thursday, we will be discussing all of the details in this video. Thank you.